Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and if you're a regular on my channel, you might already know what these tubs up on my bench are for. The ones that are resting on top of those pieces of wood that have that wire running out of there. Basically, I got a string of Christmas lights under there, under that little, shallow box that I created out of the wood. And it's an open box where the top is open, covered only by these plastic containers, trying to absorb some of the heat. I'm running what I call cocoon nurseries over there, and it's my understanding that cocoons need a little bit of warmth in order to be able to, hatch. So to try to prompt the hatching of whatever cocoons might have been left behind in those castings by the worms, I'm applying a little bit of heat. But I've got one system that's not going to need that treatment once it comes to an end, and I believe it's very near its end. It's the system that you see right here. Usually the oldest of my bins is over here on the left, and they're both undergoing the same process of the worms being evacuated from the material, but even though this one started a little bit late and is even younger than the other bin, the oldest bin, I think it's going to actually finish sooner. In fact, I think it might even finish today when we check in. It's been 10 days now since we came in here to reinforce the feeding on this edge of the bin. Both systems are doing this horizontal migration process where we try to lure the worms out of the finished compost. So we nudge the finished compost over, and then we started to bait the worms over into this edge of the bin. And after 17 days, we initially set this up, let it run for 7 days. We replenished the food 10 days ago. 17 days later, there could be a chance that the exit of the worms is complete and that they're all in here, in which case this is a done deal, and these castings don't need to become a nursery. You know why? Because over the course of numerous haul outs, all the adult worms that could have possibly created cocoons in there were systematically removed from the material and placed into a new bin to separate them from the old environment that they used to inhabit. So theoretically, the last adult worm was removed from this system, what I calculated to be 44 days ago. So, in that time, the last cocoon that might have been left in here by those last few that were extracted at that time would have hatched by now, theoretically, and there's really no more worms to be lured out of there after we get this batch of worms out of the horizontal migration feeding zone. So we're going to check on this system, see how things are doing. As we've done in the past, we're going to take any collected worms, put them there, and if it appears like all the worms have exited the material, then that system will be done today at 155 days after 17 days of migration. So let's get to work. Now, to elaborate just a little further on what I already explained, the bin that we're working on today, the 155-day-old bin, started out with an initial phase that I refer to as just the basic composting. It received 15 feedings during that time, and it lasted 111 days, after which we did something that I customarily refer to as foraging, which means no feedings during that time. And that's the whole idea, that they're breaking down any leftovers that were applied during the initial first phase to try to create a more fine material, one that's more depleted of food substance, potentially contributing to it becoming a reason for them to go searching for more fresh food. So after a certain period of time, for whatever reason you decide the material's fine enough, the food has run out, whatever the case may be, maybe that's when you would begin the final phase of trying to move the worms out, which I refer to as migration. Horizontal migration, because some people have trays that stack up on one another, and that's referred to as a vertical migration. So I just distinguish this from that as a horizontal migration. So here we are, 17 days into it. This over here just represents those 4 individual haul outs of worms, possibly followed by today, the 5th and final haul out of worms. I'm assuming that this way it's going to go, because when we were in here last 10 days ago, it seemed like there was virtually no worm action remaining in here. 10 days of additional drying of the material, as well as additional food that was added into here at that point 10 days ago. It seems very unlikely we're going to find any worms in here. So I think the first thing is just going to be determining whether or not migration needs to continue, because I'm prepared for letting that happen. It's certainly not a process I want to rush. I want to just verify that the move out, the exit of the worms from the material, is a complete job, and I already see movement. And there is always that possibility that it's just the dampness over here near the feeding area that's keeping the worms from making that final plunge, passing through the cardboard and making their way over to join the rest of the party. So a lot of times, this is really all I need to see. I just want to make sure that there's a good reason to continue the migration. Often, not often, but I think I've had it occur where I went to the trouble of, resetting the feeding zone, adding bedding, adding food, and then only after that taking a look to see how the finished compost was doing and how the migration was progressing to find that there was really no need to reload the feeding area because all the worms had already left. So it seems like a good thing just to verify that what you're preparing to do is necessary. Maybe it's already a done deal. So I'm just not gonna I'm not gonna pick through this still somewhat damp material and fish out every worm. But I just figured, hey, if the material on the perimeter can get scooped out with maybe 5 or 6 good handfuls, how many worms are in one handful, then we can kind of extrapolate how many worms might still remain in this material to be moved out. In the end, it could just seem like a fairly inconsequential number, and it could just be isolated to the damp material on the perimeter. I guess part of the reason I'm excavating like this is that I'm thinking maybe we can actually move dry material in the place of the damp material, and at the same time pick the worms out. Maybe at that point, I don't know, it just seems, now it seems like we would put this dry material obstacle in between any remaining worms and where we want them to go, so that seems like maybe it's not a very good idea. Maybe it would cause some worms to turn tail and not want to make the plunge through the dry material to get to the food. So, yeah, okay, so I guess maybe the best bet is simply to aerate it, so this way we don't end up with like a harsh, sudden drying of the material right there on the edge. This way the worms will still feel comfortable approaching and traversing the, not barrier, I don't want to call it a barrier, it's really more of a visual aid, just to help me see where the finished castings end and where the baiting area begins. Well, it's not even that bad over here, maybe it was just that one section was a little bit more damp and held a little bit more of a worm population. Maybe as we continue to check out how this other end of the partition looks, maybe we'll see fewer worms. Maybe there was just that one little spot. Although this is going to continue, I believe, at this point beyond 17 days, I still don't know whether or not we're going to have to add food. And most occasions when I'm doing something like this, checking in and disturbing the bin, it seems like it's at that point it would make most sense to just go ahead and replenish the food supply to help the process continue going robustly. So I didn't come down here with any food. Chances are I'll shoot upstairs to get something to add into here to help keep this moving along, because the stuff they got last time probably has been eaten up. I don't know, it's just a guess, because there was stuff like cucumbers in there, and cucumbers definitely don't last. I know there was some other thing that was also a really desirable food item that the worms really like. But whatever it was, it rung in my mind that it was stuff that probably isn't going to last, and probably stuff that would, work on luring the worms if they can sense that one of their favorites is nearby. So this is a really good, thorough aeration of the material right up alongside this partition wall. I usually don't go to this extent to aerate it out, but at this point we have pretty much excavated each of those 6 or so handfuls of material that we talked about earlier, and we've even gone that extra mile and helped some of these worms that are right there on the edge to make it over and rejoin their friends and neighbors. And hopefully there's no real reason for them to want to turn tail back into this finished compost material. What we've set up for them on the other side is really cozy and tempting, a lot of moisture. I even sprayed extra moisture into here last time, I believe. Here again, I'm just going on my basic recollection of how the last check-in went. I did kind of skim through it, but offhand I just don't remember what it was that we fed. But yeah, we got a good number of the worms out of here. I just can't account for how many more there really are. And it's for that reason, mainly, I believe, we're just going to continue with this process a little longer. It's not a race, so it doesn't matter how long it takes usually. In that other bin that I showed you, we're already at something like 26 or 27 days, I believe. So basically nearing 4 weeks. In this bin, we haven't even hit 3 weeks yet at day 17. I mean, I have to say that the material in that other bin is much more damp when you pick through the castings, meaning, you know, maybe there's less reason for the worms in that system to want to seek something more comfortable. Here the material does seem a little bit drier, possibly contributing to the movement of the worms out of it. So I just can't seem to resist wanting to like break up and aerate this material a little bit to help the process along. I guess I was prepared to do a full extraction of the feeding area. I had this pretty good sized container, and that would have only been if we didn't see any worms over here in this finished compost. And granted, we've only seen worms out here near the perimeter, meaning that they're doing our bidding. It seems like they're, you know, doing it wholeheartedly. I guess my hope is that as we approach the material out on this far edge, we don't see any or many more worms. And I haven't had to move a worm over, but I guess I just had to say something and then the worm would appear, right? So it's those little pockets where there's still enough dampness and maybe a little morsel of food that's keeping the worm from wanting to go search out something better. There's probably a good number of pockets like that, but so far, you know, I would have to say we're doing pretty good. I guess the real litmus test is to check all the way on the very, very far edge. Stuff over here is quite dry, pretty deep. I've already dug about halfway down and I've only hit material that I think worms would probably not want to hang out in. Sometimes worms surprise you. Sometimes you find them in the driest stuff that you really wouldn't expect to see any worms in. So I just hope we don't have any little wormies all the way on this far edge that haven't even made an initial attempt to even find our feeding zone. My hope is that out here we've got pretty much nothing going on, and so far that's what we're getting. So I mean, I think we're pretty darn close. I bet we give this thing another few days and the last of the worms will have moved out on their own. And I guess a lot of people would just suggest that, hey, why don't you just leave it be? If there's a few worms remaining in the stuff, what do you expect? It's castings after all, right? And, you know, anybody saying something like that would be correct, absolutely correct. So some people might say, let's go for it. Let's just consider this a done deal and let's reuse the container for something more productive, you know, get these guys working on a whole new batch of material or whatever. I guess if these guys are destined to be reunited with the rest of the family in that other existing in progress bin, then let's do that. But whatever. I think I'm good to just let it run out until it happens in its entirety to the finish, because it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot left to go. But you know what? I think we've done a pretty good job on the finished casting side to do whatever it is in our power to help that stuff get to the point where it gets fully evacuated. Perhaps we even kind of went overboard with the whole extraction of individual worms one at a time, but that's okay. It also kind of satisfies my curiosity in terms of what's going on out there in the material. So these holes in the cardboard seem to be in pretty good shape. You know, I just want to make sure that they're, you know, not consisting of layers that have sort of delaminated from each other and shifted away and obscure the holes. I want the holes to be a really easy way for the worms to make it over here and join the party. There's not a whole lot going on right there on the perimeter, but then again, that's not where I put the food in last time. I put the food on the opposite edge, all the way up against the far end. So my hope is that if there were any lingering babies coming out of cocoons or any juveniles that we didn't selectively extract from the system, then we've got them gathering over on this edge of the bin. So I've got a handful of pretty puny little baby African night crawlers here. I don't see any big worms. All the big worms got moved out. These are all little guys that were conceived and born here, which is pretty awesome. The funny thing about this bin is that it was given to me with an estimate of 500 worms in it, and the promise of lots of cocoons as well. So that was kind of understood that there'd be more worms coming online, but I used that 500 number as a starting point, and then each time I did one of these extractions that you see with the diagonal arrows showing worms being moved out of here into the other container, I did actually count the worms one by one. 129 on one occasion, and 111 or whatever, you know, all these oddball numbers, whatever they may be, but they all came out to a really round number, 650 in total, individually counted, so it's a pretty reliable number. So out of the original 500 that started this system, we managed to extract 650 by the time the final extraction occurred. So this bin theoretically has a population of negative 150 if you take the 650 away from the original 500. So, you know, that's either just evidence of a serious miscalculation of how many worms were originally used to start the system, or it might be evidence of propagation of numbers and reproduction. Hopefully it's the latter. So yeah, lots of little baby African night crawlers, lots of them. I don't even know how I'd be able to come up with an estimate for how many are in here. But there's a lot. I think there's a good number of them. But you know what I didn't see? I didn't see one piece of cucumber. I did not see even one little shred of any of the food they got last time, whatever it was. Not even a little fragment. Well, you know what? There we go. I found a banana peel, stem and all, holding together pretty good. This would have been part of the initial baiting, because I remember even bumping into that last time we came in here and replenished the food. Because I don't think banana was part of what they got last time, but I believe what we're going to do here before we close up the container and let it continue is we're going to bolster this feeding zone with a little bit more fresh bedding and food. I'm going to have to run up to the kitchen to get some stuff for these little guys. Alright, I was just figuring we can maybe use some of these larger pieces as sort of a top covering to hold the moisture in at the end. Thought I might have encountered another one. Here it is. Is this? No, it's a banana peel. Yeah, I just felt like if I could use some of the existing material that's down in here, serving sort of the purpose of bedding as maybe a top covering, it would help with the retention of moisture in here, maybe create a little covering that the worms enjoy squirming around beneath. But whatever, I think we'll do good with just that one coffee filter draped over the top before we cover things up here. I've been gradually applying pressure here. You might have noticed it as a little sneaky move on my part, but I believe I've somewhat enlarged the size of our feeding zone over here. I mean, this cardboard did sort of angle in a little bit originally, and I've sort of taken that space. So yeah, I think we've got plenty of room down here. I'm going to let this be for a minute while I head up to the refrigerator to get some stuff to do this with, and then we'll proceed with the reloading of the food for these little guys to help this process continue and hopefully finish soon. The stuff that I selected for them from the freezer is not much. Some red cabbage or purple cabbage, whatever, the peels of a potato and a tomato, as well as some customary coffee. And hey, we've even got another piece of paper that we can boost up our evaporation protection with. So let's bring in a little bit of my pre-made bedding. Let's see. This is the stuff that I whipped up a day or two ago, and over on this side, you can tell it's a little bit more soaked, a little bit more aged. That's the stuff that's been around for a while. So I just kind of go back and forth, and I replenish on one end, and then I use from the other end. So I've got a little bit of this fresh bedding here to build this area up with. It's not so much about building the area up, I think, as much it is just wanting to protect the worms a little bit from the frozen stuff that I'm placing in here. I suppose if the stuff was thaw, I could just dump it right in, but I feel better knowing that I'm sort of sheltering any worms nearby from getting bombarded with freezing stuff. So this frozen tomato is going to melt as soon as I put this warm coffee. This thing's straight out of the coffee maker, still warm. So I I wanted to get rid of it since I was coming down here already. Alright, see if we can mix in this coffee, which is still soaking wet, with some of the bedding that we just dropped in. Not bad, not bad. I guess by having a nice warm bed of coffee to rest these frozen foods on, we don't have to worry too much about the fact that it's being placed in here in a frozen state. They won't be frozen for long, I don't think. And stuff like this, even if it is frozen, it's paper thin, not paper thin, but still, it's just a chunk of cabbage, which shouldn't take long to thaw out. It's not like a massive, dense object that would take forever to thaw. And I guess it continues. I don't know. I'm curious, you know. I don't think we've got many more worms left to see exit our finished compost over here. Why am I using my... Whatever. At this point, I'm going to be washing both hands. So, oh, moving some of these little guys back over the feeding area, which is now frozen stuff. Hopefully we're not going to freak out any of our worms here with all this rough handling. So I think we've still got a couple worms left that need to come out of this material over here. I'm going to fold this over. I don't want to let that also prevent evaporation and drying from the finished compost. But I think we've done a pretty good job, you know, tilling up all that stuff and giving it all a nice chance to really air out and dry off, and you know, as a result, just become perhaps a little bit less hospitable for the worms to want to stay in. Maybe get them motivated, get them moving. Maybe it'll cause them to wind up over where we want them, you know. Come on over. We've got fresh food, we've got fresh moisture. This time I don't think I need to add moisture. I think everything in here is just fine. And the stuff that we just put in there, those veggies as they thaw, they're going to kick out some moisture, especially that tomato. So let's drop this over onto this side. And at this point it doesn't make much difference. My hands are dirty anyway, right? And I think the only other thing remaining is a little bit more protection from the evaporation. So we'll get this plastic draped back over the feeding area, and the process will continue. So I wonder how much longer this is going to take. Probably not long, if you ask me. I think what we did on the compost side, the tilling, I think that's really going to help a lot. And even over here, this now third application of food to motivate the worms to come on over, that can't hurt either, because that's another, I don't know, maybe the tomato and the cabbage are things that the worms will like. I don't know, for me it seems like potato are not such a big deal in the worm bins. They don't really dig the potato as much as some of those other things, but I think we've created a nice tempting space for them to be lured over to. So I think we're going to have to wait to see how many worms we collected here, but we got a little sneak preview into it today, which was kind of cool. But other than that, and a little bit of cleaning up and putting away that I've got to take care of before I'm done here, we're finished. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you leave. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.